Good morning to those in Washington. Good afternoon to those in Ukraine and in Europe, elsewhere in Europe, I should say. My name is John Herbst, and I run the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. We have a wonderful event for you this morning, the consequences of Russia's war on energy security, and an all-star cast of speakers. Leading with Robin Dunnigan, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the European Bureau. There is Maxim Timchenko, the Chief Executive Officer of DTEC. There is Yuri, the Chief Executive Officer of Naftahaz. There's Dr. Paul Sullivan, who's a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center. And there's Deborah Kagan, a distinguished energy fellow at the Transatlantic Leadership Network. Okay, we will have a moderated conversation and then audience questions after the moderated conversation ends. And the first question is to DAS Dunnigan. Robin, the U.S. has performed effectively over the past several months in helping find new supplies of gas and oil for Europe as Moscow prepared for and launched its new invasion of Ukraine. What were the major challenges and how were you able to manage them?
Hi, John. Thank you to you and to Atlantic Council for hosting this and the many other events you've hosted in support of Ukraine over the last months, really. I want to start by saying that there have been some perverse outcomes for Vladimir Putin to this war against Ukraine. And the biggest perverse outcome of all, I think, is it will be in the end a true strategic defeat for Putin. And we've seen the elements of that in this series of what I am calling perverse outcomes. One is that NATO is more unified than ever. NATO is more popular, and there's more support for NATO across Europe than ever. Defense spending is up across Europe. There's been a transformational change in defense policy in countries like Germany and other places across Europe. And fundamentally, there's been a transformational change in Europe's approach to diversifying away from Russian energy. I've been working on European energy security for decades, and never have I seen such a commitment. And this time it feels real to diversifying away from Russian oil and gas. In answer to your specific question, John, what have we done? I would say in the energy sphere, it's very similar to what we've done in the sanction sphere and our support for Ukraine sphere, which is careful coordination with our allies and partners across the globe to achieve an objective in support of Ukraine and Europe right now. We worked with natural gas producers globally, partners and allies, and here in the United States to look at how natural gas production can be increased right now. We talked to LNG exporters and countries who are LNG off-takers about postponing or diverting LNG cargoes to Europe during this time. We worked within the IEA to have a coordinated SPR release of 60 million barrels of oil. We worked with Europe and Ukraine on the ENSO-E connection, which is just an incredible development in a short amount of time. And again, a perverse outcome of Putin's war. So we've taken all of these steps, and it's really been by working with our partners and allies, sort of careful, hard diplomacy over a number of months. I just traveled to Poland and Romania with the vice president, and then I was in Slovenia. And in each of these countries, the conversation about energy security and diversification, it's just fundamentally different than it was even a year ago. There is a new commitment, not only to diversifying away from Russian fossil fuels, but diversifying into cleaner, more sustainable fossil energy in the future. I think that we were all, to see the European Commission publish a plan to cut dependence on Russian gas by 2/3 this year is just, it's just a sea change. And that, again, in the long run, will be a strategic defeat for Russia. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Timchenko, as the head of DTEC, you are involved in pretty much the entire Ukrainian energy sector. What are the major problems in Ukraine's energy sector prompted by the war?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for this event, and thank you for all your attention to Ukraine and ability for us to tell what is happening in our sector. I think after 21 days of war, we can all be proud of our nation, our military forces, and we can be proud of all people, 100,000 of people involved in stable operation of our energy system. So just 4 hours before war started, we disconnected from Russia and Belarus. And for 21 days, we work on isolated regime, so-called isolated regime, not connected to any other neighboring countries. And we managed to make it stable, despite of Russian attacks to Zaporozhye nuclear power station, despite of explosion next to our thermal power stations, and all these difficulties, our energy system in stable operation, and this stability depends on 3 factors. The first, our power generating facilities. As I said, we managed to switch from nuclear to thermal power stations if we have difficulties. We managed to switch from coal to gas if we have difficulties in coal shipment to our power stations. And basically all participants of the market, and starting with transmission system operator, Ukrenergo, into power generators, done everything to make it stable. The second is fuel supply. For 21 days, we managed to increase our coal stocks, and today we have as much as 900,000 tons of coal stock of our power stations. It will be enough for 30 days of operation without any coal supply. Today, the TEC produce more coal than at pre-war level, and it's about 90% of whole coal supply. And as soon as we continue stable operation of our coal mines, then we will have enough coal, even if we have to reload from nuclear power stations to thermal power stations. And the third factor bringing this stability is, of course, a historic event for our energy sector as synchronization of Ukrainian energy system to European. Final decision was taken yesterday. Physically, we are synchronized. And today, Ukrainian energy system is part of European energy system, and we feel that we are part of Europe now, at least in the sense of electricity market. I think these 3 factors encourage us to keep the stable operation, to win our energy front, and I would say it's great contribution from our partners and from all people working in this sector to victory of Ukraine.
I'd like to follow that up. You mentioned you're now connected to the EU electricity grid. Did the EU, you might say, speed this up in the light of Moscow's aggression?
No, that's from yesterday. We are connected. So from yesterday, we are connected to European energy grid. It was done on an accelerated way because before it was planned to do it only in 2023. Now our partners with Ukrainian transmission system operator agreed on so-called emergency synchronization. So it means that in case if you don't have enough capacity in Ukraine, then we can get electricity from European countries to support us.
Correct.
This was done yesterday.
But I mean, this has been a long-term goal of Ukraine, and you've been very, very competent and efficient in pursuing this, but you were having some problems on the European side as recently as last summer, or maybe even the early fall. So my question is, the fact that this has gone into effect under these emergency procedures, this seems to be another impact of Putin's escalation of the war in Ukraine. Is that correct?
Yes, I don't believe in such coincidence. Hours of disconnection and start of war. Of course, all my statement can be some kind of speculation, but of course, Russians were so against of this synchronization. They did whatever they could, starting from diplomacy and going through all other ways. And finally, they realized that no way that we change our goal to be part of European energy market, and that's happened. And basically, I think that this is the situation also supporting European energy sector and security of European energy because of our nuclear capacity, which can be treated as a clean energy and clean electricity. I believe that time will come when Ukraine start exporting clean electricity to European countries, strengthening energy security of EU.
Okay.
And of course, Russians were strongly against of all these developments.
I would simply add this fact that you've joined the EU energy grid or electricity grid to the list of particulars that Robin pointed out earlier about Moscow's strategic defeat with this invasion. It's just one more indicator. Okay, Mr. Sullivan.
John, I'm sorry to interrupt, just really quickly, because I forgot to say it, and it's so important that I do say it. That in addition to DTEC and Naftogaz and the Ministry of Energy officials in Ukraine, I think that they have just done an outstanding job in maintaining everything that they've been able to maintain since February 24th. And I also want to commend the private sector more broadly, the energy private sector, who made tough decisions to pull out, to divest, to stop to stop new investments on their own before sanctions forced them to. And I just think it's very commendable. Sorry to interrupt, but I forgot to say it and I meant to say it.
No, I'm glad you jumped in. And I can tell you, I've been huge fans of Nafta since I met Kobolyev and Vitrenko in Kiev in June of 2014. Okay, with that, Mr. Sullivan, what are the I'm sorry, Maxime, you want to jump in?
No. This is Paul. I'd like to support Mr. Timchenko's comments by saying this war on Ukraine is a war on the Ukrainian energy system as well. Maxime knows that all too well. They went after the nuclear plants. They took parts of the east where the coal and the natural gas can be found. They took parts of the Black Sea where the oil and gas can be found. They went after the electricity networks. They're attacking electricity generating systems. This is an energy war on Ukraine, and I have a paper coming out, a very short one coming out pretty soon on that. But back to the EU. EU and Russia, big players on the world oil and gas markets. EU's response seems to be cautious, but obviously a lot stronger than it's been for a long time. We've been warning them since the time of John F. Kennedy not to get involved with Russia in the pipelines. What they've done is allow more pipelines to be built, to allow some of their former politicians to be corrupt enablers of those pipelines. And they've also reduced their production of oil and gas considerably over the last 10 years. So there's a lot they could have done that they haven't done. In a way, they've been sleepwalking into this. And excuse me if I seem a bit blunt, but that certainly seems the case. Now, if the EU is looking for alternatives, don't try what some of us are doing, looking for Iran and Venezuela. Why move from one problematic state to another two problematic states, including a terror state and a narco state? This makes no sense. Iran, if the deal is made, will start LNG production, will increase its oil exports, so there'll be some temptation there. But countries to focus on: Canada, the US, Norway, places in North Africa, West Africa, obviously OPEC, Saudi Arabia, and UAE have excess capacity, although there are some problematic relations with that may change that development. My former student, Yusuf Al-Taiba, the UAE ambassador, made a comment last week, which kind of opened up the markets. It's amazing how much power his words have had on this. Biden has banned Russian oil and gas and just about everything else. One thing that's not being banned is uranium and uranium services. Russia controls 50% of enrichment in the world. Something has to be done about that. We've stopped all new investment, all tech transfer. But the US, it's easier. We have fracking. Our fracking saved us from the fate that Europe is facing today. Our fracking is also the source of the LNG and oil that we're sending to Europe. PM Johnson from the UK is phasing out oil and gas. They can do that. They're a small importer of oil and gas from Russia. The EU sanctions are much more difficult. They're much more directed also at the Russian oil and gas companies, which is a good thing, stopping debt financing and loans, other financial activities, new investments. Note, new investments, new projects, and new tech transfer are being stopped. Frozen funds also makes it more difficult, and transaction bans are making it extraordinarily difficult. But the real problem with oil hasn't even started yet. The IEA had a report out just yesterday saying 3 million barrels a day will be disappearing from the market because of these sanctions. That's pretty strong. There's going to be a huge competition for oil barrels throughout the world. China may be a source because they're slowing down. But you have to be quick to the mark on that one because others will be trying to grasp that oil. China can redirect its tankers. It can redirect its LNG carriers. Japan has redirected some of its LNG carriers.
Well, we got to close up now. We got other stuff.
Okay, sorry. There's so much more to say. It's a fascinating topic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Let's see now. Mr. Vitrenko, Ukraine has survived the winter with sufficient gas despite Moscow's massive invasion. How did you manage this? And what has Moscow's invasion meant for Ukraine's pipelines?
Last year, we managed to reverse the trend of declining local gas production. Naftogaz, because the private sector was increasing production, but Naftogaz was decreasing production. We managed to reverse this trend and we started to increase production. Then we imported enough gas last summer. We also became profitable again so that we were able to finance the whole value chain efficiently so that we have enough gas to cover the needs of the internal market. And I would even say that there were some concerns that Naftogaz would not be able to have enough gas during this winter, but we proved that we were efficient in terms of managing the security of supply side inside Ukraine. And now, on one hand, in terms of, for example, our internal production, we are down compared to the pre-war level, around 5 to 7%. Our storages are currently working at full capacity. We have to provide gas, for example, to some electricity generating companies that cannot get coal because of the ruined logistics. So it's putting some pressure on us, but still, again, we managed to provide enough gas in areas where it can be done. Because the biggest problem at the moment is that when Russian blitzkrieg failed, they realized that they cannot capture Kiev in a couple of days as they expected. They now focus on creating some humanitarian crises or even catastrophes around Ukraine, like, for example, in the city of Mariupol or Akhtirka or Severodonetsk, where they're ruining the cities, basically, including the critical infrastructure like heating, like gas distribution networks. So in some places in Ukraine, we just cannot deliver gas anymore because pipelines are bombed. Heating plants are bombed. I would, by the way, just mention that personally, I'm so proud of Ukrainians and people who work in the energy sector. Some of their work is just heroic. So, for example, we have a heating plant in Kherson. 2 of the employees were killed in the first days of the occupation. But people still continued to work on this plant. They blocked the whole plant, and for 7 days were there basically besieged, but they ensured uninterrupted supply of heating in this city of Kherson. So, and for example, in many other places, people just literally go under bullets to make sure that infrastructure is working or to repair the infrastructure. The same applies to our colleagues in the electricity sector. And with this kind of heroic efforts, again, people can still have some critical supplies as, again, heating, gas, electricity. Just to reiterate that historically, when we were talking about humanitarian assistance, people imagine some kind of trucks or some kind of cargoes with food and medicine. But in modern countries with some centralized infrastructure, humanitarian assistance also includes, again, supply of electricity, supply of water, centralized supply of heat energy. And that's why we're very thankful, for example, to the US government that in their latest bill, they allocate something like $4 billion for the humanitarian assistance. And obviously it should include this humanitarian assistance in the utility sector, so that millions and tens of millions of Ukrainians who are still in Ukraine, millions left, but the tens of millions are still in Ukraine, they can get critical supplies, again, like electricity, gas, heating.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Ms. Kagan, what is your view of U.S. energy policy in the crisis? Has it protected the U.S. economy and promoted our interests in Europe and beyond?
Thank you, and really, really pleased to be on with such a number of august people here today. Very, very honored. First, I want to say my congratulations to Ukraine, who in the midst of a war has done better at delivering electricity and power to its population than certain West Coast states did during some forest fires. And I think that is something to be very proud of, and really amazing that you were able to accomplish this. I think there's a couple things I just want to point out here. One, I think it's fine and good to focus on renewables, to focus on transition to green. But I think US policy has gone almost too quickly from brown to green and bypass blue. And what I mean by that is gas. And I think there are people in the administration who have almost treated gas as opposed to legitimately calling it a transition fuel, have wanted to throw that baby out with the bathwater, and maybe too precipitously. And I think that is now beginning to show. I believe that US policy, for example, on the EastMed pipeline, I think all of us aren't naive. We know that pipeline was unlikely to ever be built, but was it prudent for Secretary Envoy, the Envoy Kerry, to announce that so publicly in the midst of what was going on in Ukraine? Similarly, what kind of message does it send when 40 members of Congress all of a sudden called for an entire shutdown of all fossil, no tapping of wells, no new drilling, no new anything they're bringing to market? So some of this is great. They're ideals for moving toward a renewable future, which I'm incredibly supportive of, but some of it is incredibly tone deaf. And so the administration has done a lot of flip-flopping on these issues. And I think that it would be better at this juncture to speak with one voice and not have an energy envoy say one thing in public that then almost sounds like it's contradicting what the president says during his press conferences on these issues. So I think that US energy policy has been a bit confusing for people. There are people like me who are supposed to understand this and follow it, and I confess to being flummoxed on some of the announcements that are being made. And I think it would be best that even if your plans include certain things for 4 years out, 5 years out, is it really necessary to have that discussion in the middle of crisis when you're asking other countries to ramp up their delivery of LNG? And as Das Dunnigan said, we're asking US producers to ramp up those LNG sales to Europe during this crisis. So I would argue that the administration has to speak with one voice and stop confusing everyone globally as well as its own domestic audience.
Okay, Deborah, thank you. Robin, you may want to react to that, but I also have a question for you.
Yeah. Look, we need both. We need a commitment to move toward cleaner, more sustainable energy. And I think this crisis is accelerating that commitment, not only our own commitment, but in Europe. but some of those longer term solutions like SMR, small modular reactors, aren't solutions that are going to be in place in a year or 2 years. And we're also very cognizant that Europe's dependence on Russian natural gas is much higher than ours, and they don't have the ability to, stop all Russian gas imports today. So we need both. We need a commitment to continue to this transition on clean energy, and we need to use natural gas as a transition fuel. And Europe is going to need different sources of natural gas that are not Russian in the immediate future. We're also going to need more pipelines, more pipelines that are reversible, more ways to move gas from LNG terminals within Europe, if we're not using Russian gas in Europe. So we need both, and we need a commitment to doing both. And it's not going to be easy. It's not always going to be the cheapest way forward, but I think the last 3 weeks have really shown us that we need to do it.
Robin, I think you may have partly answered the question I was going to ask you, but I'll ask it anyway in case you want to add to it. Again, I think the U.S. government has done a very strong job in the last few months dealing with this new energy crisis. But what do you think we need to do now to ensure our own energy security and that of our partners and allies? Is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, I think that is, I think I really did just summarize it mostly. And so maybe I'll just take 30 seconds to echo what Yuri said about the energy workers within Ukraine, because one of the things we need to do when we come out of this is ensure that the nuclear power plants are stable, that grids are workable, that people have electricity and are able to warm or cool their houses and run their factories and their businesses. And we've just seen this incredible resilience among all Ukrainians. But since we're talking about energy, I think in the energy sector, that's particularly true. And our assistance going forward will need to, as I think Yuri mentioned, we'll need to take into account electricity as well.
Okay, thank you. Maxime, this sort of follows up on what Robin just said, but Russian troops seized the nuclear reactors in Chernobyl and near Zaporizhia. What dangers does this present, and what should Kyiv and Washington do to manage this threat?
I think that the whole world woke up on 4th of March, realizing the next level of madness of Russians when they attacked Zaporizhia nuclear power station, one of the largest power stations in Europe. So it was just miracle they didn't damage 6 nuclear power units at this station, because it was just several meters this administrative building they attacked. So now they cross another red line, and nobody can expect what will be the next. So what was important for us is to react on this immediately, so that load was switched from nuclear power station to thermal power station, and we kept stability of the system. But it was another argument for Ukrainians and for our government and for us to request no-fly zone above nuclear power stations. And I think that the whole world realized the seriousness of this request, because it will be disaster not only for Ukraine but for the whole continent if they attack another nuclear power station. And I just want to remind that we have 6 nuclear power stations in Ukraine. So for us, what is important is that have enough capacity to keep the energy system stable. What was good is that half of nuclear power stations were already switched to fuels supplied from Westinghouse, and we should think about future. So it was official announcement that now we refuse to take any fuel for nuclear power station from Russia, and we need to have very clear actions how to replace it. Then for nuclear waste storage is another issue, because we send it to Russia and we need to think about that. Then, as I said, we have to have enough supply of coal and gas in Ukraine, and talking about both We have one of the largest reserves of coal and gas in Europe, and we have to consolidate all our efforts that finally Ukraine will become independent from gas supply from especially from Russia and definitely from any third parties, because we have all factors to make it to be self-sufficient in fuel supply. So what is important for us is to keep working as we did it for 21 days. We need help from our partners, not only by providing materials or coal in case if we need it, but also financial support. Today, just to remind everybody, drop of collection of payment for electricity is about 70%. So it means only 30% of revenue is collectible at this moment, and it's quite understandable. And we have to think not only about technical stability of the system, but also financial stability. Based on our calculation, we need support about $250 million a month to keep running our power stations, paying salaries and paying for materials. And we ask for this help to Energatom, our state nuclear company. And we need this injection as soon as possible to avoid any financial collapse of our system. So in general, we know what to do to keep it stable, but we need support.
All right, thank you. Ms. Sullivan, after years of cultivating dependence on Russian oil and gas, Europe is moving, I'd say, swiftly to reduce that. How do you see this working out?
Well, cultivating dependence is a fascinating term. And I've heard Frau von der Leyen say on many occasions that she wants energy independence. There is no such thing as energy independence. No country is energy independent. You want greater energy security. Please, let's all stop using the word energy independence. But dependence on a country like Russia is a bad thing to do. And that has been cultivated for decades, since the Soviet Union. This was a time bomb ready to happen, waiting to happen. It was in the cards. And another to go forward with what Mr. Chimchenko said, we're going to have to completely reconfigure reprocessing and enrichment for uranium in the world, away from Russia to other places, because inside of the spent fuel of those Ukrainian nuclear plants is plutonium and other fissile materials. So let's see what we can do about that. Cultivating greater energy security will involve moving toward importing more LNG into the EU. Everyone knows that by now. Only about 10 to 15% of the gas being imported into the EU now is from LNG. Most of it's by pipes, and that ties the EU greatly to Russia, but pipes also come in from Norway and Azerbaijan and other places, and that's not necessarily bad. For oil, most of the oil imported into the EU is by ships, which means this can be relatively easy replaced with certain logistical challenges, of course, and extra costs. The pipelines like Druzhba make things a lot more difficult because Druzhba is connected to refineries. And those refineries will have to have pipes redirected, refitted, and reformed in order to be able to get this stuff from ports. The entire oil system of pipelines has to be changed, but the shipping doesn't necessarily have to be changed. And I think that's about it for my answer to that. There's a lot more I can say on that. We have to look at the do lists for the immediate, the short run, the medium run, and the long run. We can't expect everything to happen immediately. Things take time, folks.
Okay, thank you. Excellent. All right, Yuri. Ukraine is asking Europe to join the US by ending purchases now of Russian gas and oil. Some say this is not doable, and anyway, China will buy those hydrocarbons. Your reaction?
It is doable, both in the short term and especially in the long term. but there should be a proper sequence how to do it. So first of all, the US government should adopt a so-called secondary sanctions on the against the Russian financial sector. Because currently there are some exemptions or holes in these financial sanctions. There should be no holes, so the secondary sanctions should be adopted. Then there should be a ban on Russian gas and oil, except for cases where proceeds from the sales go to some specific escrow accounts. And these escrow accounts should operate in a way when Russians can get access to these escrow accounts only when they stop the war and they withdraw from Ukraine. It will motivate them to, again, to withdraw from Ukraine. At the same time, it will provide at least a chance for Europe to get some oil and gas from Russia. And as a head of the gas company, I can say that it's not that easy to shut down producing wells. So gas, you have to do something with this gas. We can flare it, but it's by far the worst option for you. So chances are that Russians will continue to flow gas to Europe and oil the same, even if they cannot get access, immediate access to this money. That's why this mechanisms of escrow accounts is something that should be very seriously considered, at least. But first, again, the US should adopt the secondary sanctions against the financial sector of Russia. In terms of China, again, I would not be concerned that Russian gas will flow, instead of flowing to Europe, it will flow to China. You have to build new pipelines, huge pipelines to redirect this gas from Urengoy, from Bomvanenkovo, basically Yamal, the areas where currently they produce gas that goes to Europe. To build these pipelines, again, it takes years and tens of billions of dollars, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. They would need technology that they don't have themselves. And because of the sanctions, they cannot get these technologies, even to build these pipelines. So that's why it's next to impossible. But also, you see, the problem with Russian gas and oil flowing to Europe, unlike, for example, flowing to China, is that Russians were able to abuse their dominance in the European market. They were able to corrupt European politicians and European, again, countries, basically. They were able to get very high prices out of Europe for the energies they supply to Europe. It would not be possible with China. So they just won't get this kind of money that they're getting from Europe. And also, again, it's the best of both worlds. Europe won't be as corrupt. Also, what is very important is that it's not just the financial dimension that is important here, because of course this, again, the money they get from Europe, it fuels Russian Nazism. Let's call things by their names. But also it's important from a kind of mental point of view, because for this Russian Nazi state, it's important to be integrated with the West. It's important to show that Merkel is opening another Nord Stream, that Schroeder, the former chancellor, you see, sits on the boards of state-owned companies. They and Putin nourishes this smug feeling. You see, the smug feeling of superiority of the Russian nations over other nations like Ukrainian nation and other nations in the world. If Russia cannot sell its oil and gas to Europe, it can only sell it to China. They become like a raw material colony of China, you see. And from this perspective, from the perspective of the necessity, urgent necessity to fight Russian Nazism, it will be a very good choice. That's why we should do everything possible to break all the ties between the Western world and Russia, until Putin goes away, until Russian Nazism is destroyed as the state ideology.
Okay, I want to have a quick follow-up question. because you made a very important point, but you made it in the weeds. And I'd like you to explain it for non-experts. You said that because of the way gas production proceeds, Russia really needs to continue producing gas and sending it to Europe. And this Europe could pay not to the Russian government, but into an escrow account. Could you explain that in 1 minute to our audience?
It basically means that Russians cannot get this money from the exports of oil and gas.
But explain why they have to produce the gas.
Because gas flows from wells, so you have to shut them down. But if you shut them down, you permanently damage these wells. It will be permanent damage to the gas production industry in Russia. A similar situation with oil. So it flows, if you have a producing well, it flows out of this well. Reservoirs, storages, their capacity is limited. So what will you do with all the gas and oil that flows basically from your wells, especially in terms of natural gas? So again, liquefying capacities are also limited. You have to do something with that. To flare it like big fires, basically, it's the worst thing to do with that. That's why chances are that they will continue flowing gas to Europe.
Okay, so to underscore for the audience, what Yuri is arguing is that even if Europe were not to pay the current rulers of the Kremlin for the oil and gas, it would still be in Russia's economic interest to continue sending the oil and gas to Europe into an escrow and being paid in an escrow account for the future. Okay, Deborah, last question before we turn to audience. We have seen substantial US-European cooperation in imposing sanctions on Russia and trying to find alternate sources of gas in recent months. Is this the new normal? And what is the ultimate impact of this war on international oil and gas markets?
So I'm going to be a little bit cynical here for a second. I think that I would like it to be the new normal. I'm not confident that it is the new normal. I think the fact that Germany went ahead and shut down 3 of its reactors, knowing that they were in desperate straits, meant, as Das Dunnigan knows, that they were going to burn more coal, but they did not make a move to keep those reactors up and running longer despite the crisis. I'm going to raise 2 other issues here that I think sort of fly in the face of cutting Russia off at the knees on the huge amount of GDP that they do get from their fossil sales. The first is I'm going to raise Turkey, and I'm not sanguine at this point that Turkey has many alternatives to the substantial amount of gas that it's still buying from Russia. And the second point I'm going to raise is, aren't we contradicting ourselves, both the Europeans and the US, by making Russia essentially the guarantor of the impending Iran agreement? So as Paul Sullivan has said, as others have said, that, you know, if this already 60% HEU goes back to Russia, and whatever Russia does with it, either convert it to LEU for commercial reactors or any host of other things, aren't we then assuming that Russia can be trusted to do this? And what are they going to do with this vis-a-vis Iran if this is a way for them to make some money? So I think there's 2 issues here that fly in the face of this all for one and one for all about what Yuri just said and Maxime just said about having to still depend on Russia for some of these things. And I'm not going to touch the market piece on this because I think it gets into too much on the avariciousness of companies in the first instance. I mean, there's plenty of blame to go around here, and I don't want to go down that path. But I will say that I think discussions with Turkey, I think there's a need to hug Erdogan a lot closer than this administration has done. I think Turkey can be a critical element here for Ukraine's future as well. And I think we have to look seriously at who we're trusting to implement the elements of the Iran agreement, both who the EU and the US and the UK are trusting to do this, because Russia still has a key role from this. And I think this is part of Russia's, last minute throwing a flag on the play here to say that, will these sanctions hurt my ability to deal with Iran on this? So I just throw that out there as 2 things that sort of fly in the face of cutting Russia off at the knees.
Okay, thank you. All right, now we head to audience questions, and please panelists keep your answers to 2 minutes at the most. So Robin, the first one's for you from Mark Russellowski. And if I mispronounce your name, Mark, I apologize. The question is the U.S. in discussions with Venezuela to purchase oil from them?
Hi, no, we're not actively in discussions with Venezuela on that right now. But I would say that there was discussions several times. Several of the panelists mentioned that, will we do this? Will we do that? Will we put these secondary sanctions on? I have to say that there were many, many discussions a month ago where nobody thought that we would do any of the things that we've done. And many of the steps that the United States and the EU and European countries have taken and G7 countries have taken, folks thought wouldn't happen. So I want to continue to say that we are looking, when we're thinking about sanctions, when we're thinking about export controls, nothing's off the table. And we continue to roll out new sanctions every week, and nothing's off the table.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question is a little bit out of this area, but I will put it back into this area. It's from George Ashaka from Kampala. Well, I'm glad to see that we're being seen in Africa as well. The question is, I'll give this to you, Deborah. Don't you think that NATO countries, by failing to declare a no-fly zone in Ukraine for Russia, may be mistaken by Russia for fear and weakness of NATO countries and encouragement for Russia to continue with the war and even attack NATO countries? So to make this precisely relevant to this conversation, Deborah, if you could also pull in the point that Maxime made about a NATO no-fly zone over nuclear facilities in Ukraine, the reactors we see in Chernobyl and Zaporizhzhia.
Oh, goodness. This is a whole conversation all by itself.
But 2 minutes or less.
So very quickly, I will say this. I do think that when the leaders of the free world get together and say, spend 2/3 of their time talking about what they won't do, that sends the wrong message to the enemy. And Russia is an enemy. It's not a strategic competitor. It's an enemy. And I do think that the message is that you can go at will, plunder, kill, murder, and we're not going to do anything as long as you don't cross that line into Poland or Slovakia or Romania. And I think that is not a good statement to make. I'll go back to my first comments on messaging. It is confusing. And if you're the enemy, you take that to mean that you have free will and free reign to do what you want. So yes, I do think there are ways to do no-fly zones that are not going to lead to World War III. And I think, by the way, that's a Russian narrative. The Russians push that, Putin pushed that personally, that if you take one step in this direction, it's World War III. I think it is shameful that the United States and its allies have bought into that narrative and are repeating it. And it shows some success by Russia in painting this picture. I agree with the questioner that, yes, it does show not just weakness, but it's all in perception. And Russia sees this as being able to continue free reign in nuclear facilities, over humanitarian corridors, et cetera. And that's why they're putting landmines in those corridors as well.
Okay, thank you. And under 2 minutes. All right. The next question.
John, can I just
go ahead, Robin,
there?
please. Absolutely.
Yeah, that I need to at least give a quick response to that under 2 minutes. It is absolutely false that is a message that we're sending to Russia. We, in the last week alone, announced $1 billion in security assistance to Ukraine. That's in the last week. That brings us up to $2 billion in security assistance to Ukraine in the last year during this administration. This is javelins, stingers, anti-armor, anti-tank, anti-air systems, man-pads. It is serious equipment that the Ukrainians are using every day to bring down Russian aircraft and to defend themselves. Our allies in Europe have done similar security assistance transfers, not as large, but quite substantial. Also, we're putting the most tremendously severe package of sanctions on Russia that it has ever seen, and the consequences have been severe. The ruble is trading at less than a penny. The stock market has been closed for 3 weeks and is closed in the foreseeable future. They've been downgraded to junk by every major credit agency. International companies have fled the market. So it's been a tremendous implementation of sanctions against Russia. It's not us repeating the Russian narrative. President Biden said, first and foremost, that he wasn't going to put combat troops in Ukraine to fight Russia. And so it's actually President Biden who said that from the beginning, but he did not say that we wouldn't help Ukraine defend itself. And I think we are doing that. And Ukraine is showing remarkable abilities with not only with its own equipment and know-how, but what it's received from the West.
Okay, Robin, thank you. All right, let's move on. We have a question from anonymous attendee, and actually, Paul, this is for you because you kind of touched on this. And the question is, why is obtaining these sources, meaning oil or gas, from a terrorist state like Iran, considered problematic, but not when it's obtained from another such state as Saudi Arabia?
Oh, I was hoping I wouldn't get that question.
Good. Please, 2 minutes or less.
We have been partners with Saudi Arabia since President Franklin Delano Roosevelt met with the king on the USS Quincy, the Suez Canal, on February 14th. We have been working on issues together for a very, very long time.
That was 1945.
45, yes, sorry, 45. And thank you for the correction.
Not correction, it's addition.
I have a picture of that on my office wall. That's how important our relationship with Saudi Arabia is. Saudi Arabia is very different from Iran. Iran was involved in the bombing of our Marine base in Beirut. It's supporting Hezbollah. It's supporting the Houthis. That's a problem. Saudi Arabia is in the midst of a transformation, and we should actually be helping them in this transformation, not harming them and walking away. It's a very difficult decision. There are positives and negatives to all these, but Iran is completely different from Saudi Arabia. Completely different. They're a sworn enemy. Saudi Arabia is not a sworn enemy. We want Saudi Arabia on our side. We would like Iran on our side like it was so many years ago. But the regime right now, like Deborah mentioned, is up to 60%. That's 95% to bomb grade. They're not kidding me, and they're probably not kidding Deborah either. They're on the way. And whether we have a JCPOA or not, they're going to do it, is my guess, unless somebody stops them.
Okay, thank you. And in the time limit. All right. So this is a question from David Horgan for Yuri. Was it anticipated that oil buyers would self-sanction? And how can the world replace 3 million barrels of oil daily in a tight market?
First of all, we do see some self-sanctioning. So some major oil companies making their own choice not to buy Russian oil. Although I have to say that they did it after some pressure, after some public pressure, and they feel this public pressure all over the world. Even in Europe, in Germany, the public opinion is against, by the way, buying Russian gas and oil. And all the politicians feel it, and all the major oil companies feel it. In terms of replacing Russian oil, first of all, again, more oil can be produced inside the US, in Canada, in many parts of the world. We should also mention that, unfortunately, there was some decrease in oil and gas production last years because of two factors. So falling prices, but also because of some, I would say, rather mistaken choices of policymakers in the Western world when they decided to limit basically financing of new oil and gas projects. So as has been mentioned, this kind of shift from fossil fuels to renewables lacked a very important geopolitical dimension. People just ignored that the shift meant much more dependence on Russia. So what I'm saying that even in the short term, production can be increased and should be increased in countries without rogue regimes like Putin's regime. Also, again, energy efficiency. When prices are up, people will just travel less. So markets are self-regulating. So don't be afraid of that. And don't say that, look, that's the current market and there's nothing can be done. And that's why we will have to depend on Russia for oil and gas export. That's a very wrong approach. And at the end of this kind of, the message that I would like to deliver to everybody, look, we learned it our hard way, that the cost of destroying cities, the cost of human lives is much higher than the cost of oil and gas. So if prices go up a little bit, but you don't buy Russian gas and oil, it's much better than then Russians come and kill your people, kill your people around you.
Okay, thank you. We have another anonymous question, and I think this is for you, Maxime. How might managers of power stations and electrical grids in both Ukraine and the US develop innovative mitigation measures to harden their facilities against cyber attacks?
So, of course, we were not blind for the last months, and we're preparing for potential attacks of Russians, including cybersecurity. So for the last 3 months, we already experienced several attacks to our power grid companies. And basically, we managed to cope with these attacks. So today, so far, we feel quite strong in managing our technical equipment and be resistant to any cyber attacks.
Okay, thank you. We have another question, which I think also would fit for you, Maxime, here, except I'm now having trouble finding it on my screen. It just sort of disappeared.
John, I'm really sorry. I have to leave. So if you don't mind, again, thank you for organizing that. And thank you for all the support from the US government and from people all around the world who are supporting Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yuri, for attending. Okay, so well, I've been unable to find that question. So there's another one here. What about investments in new LNG? Actually, this has been for Yuri, but he's gone. I'll ask it anyway, and I'll give you a first shot at it, Maxime. What about investments in new LNG terminals? Would they attract enough investments given that LNG would be used as a transition fuel?
Yeah, of course, it's the question to us and to all Europeans how we replace Russian gas. It was already announced, and I think that LNG is one of the major sources of gas supply and replacement Russian gas. So I think that we all should accept, and I support Yuri, that any Russian energy products or in general products are toxic. And it's about morality of these companies who are buying this product and these products, and then send Russians revenue, which they convert into bullets, killing Ukrainians. So definitely it should be very large scale plan of replacement any of Russian energy products sent to Europe or to any other countries. And of course, Ukraine will be part of this, again, following from synchronization, where we send in our renewable and nuclear power to Europe can be part of this plan, or our participation in increasing gas production and exporting gas from Ukraine can be part of this plan. So I think it's all feasible.
Okay, thank you. It's now 11 o'clock, so I think our time is up. I'd like to thank our panelists for joining us today for a very good conversation. And I'd like to thank our audience. And let me tell our audience that on Monday, we'll be doing another event, what the current situation is across a variety of issues on Moscow's new invasion of Ukraine. So thank you all.